So in our previous videos, we've been talking about how economics is the science of choice. We looked first at how it was a science, and then we said that one of the unique things about economics is it's not just a science, but it combines those values as well. Well, we can take economic theory and we can divide it into microeconomics and macroeconomics, depending on whether we are looking at the entire economy in our economic models or whether we're looking at specific areas of the economy. So let's look at the difference between micro and macroeconomics. So let's start with microeconomics. Microeconomics is the study of decisions by people and firms as we focus on a single market. So when we talk about microeconomics, we are looking at individual markets. Right, so we might be looking at the supply and demand for a particular good, like a McDonald's hamburger. Or we might be looking at what impacts a particular company, or we may be looking at a group of customers and why they may or may not want to buy a product, what price they're willing to pay for it. So we're narrowing in on specific individual markets. Okay. And when we look at a market, we consider demand, that's the customer, and we consider supply, that's the business. So how much is the business willing to sell and at what price? How much is the customer willing to buy and at what price? It's these two together that determine the actual market price that we pay. And so microeconomics is also called price theory because we're looking at what changes the price. What changes the price of a laptop? What changes the price of that McDonald's hamburger? So we're looking at an individual market and what is causing that price to be what it is or what is causing it to change. And what causes to change is a change in the behavior of households, so consumers, or firms or businesses. So we're looking at the behavior of those businesses and consumers. Right? So why might a household decide to subscribe to Netflix instead of buying movies? Okay. We look at the allocation of scarce resources. So when we look at it from the consumer perspective, they only have so much income, they only have so much time to work, they only have so much energy. And so how do they decide where to work? How do they decide how much to work? How do they decide what to buy and what to do? We also look at it from the firm's perspective. How does a business decide what to make? How do they decide how much to make? How do they decide what combination of workers and machines and other materials? Because those workers are a scarce resource as well as the raw materials and the machines. So you only have so much and you have to decide what combination of them to make your particular product. So when we talk about microeconomics, we're looking at what determines the price and the quantity sold. We're looking at the choices made by households and businesses or consumers and firms, how they allocate their scarce resources. So this semester, the way we're going to tackle that is we're going to start with you, the individual. What do you like? What can you afford? We will then combine you with others, and that will determine consumer or market demand. What collectively is the group willing and able to buy? That will then determine this demand curve here, where as the price is higher, we know that people are less willing and less able to buy. But when the prices are lower, we can afford more. And if we like it, we're going to get more. So we can develop the demand curve. We'll then change perspectives and look at it from the business side. So here we have a single company like McDonald's. We can look at how much they are willing to produce based on their cost, based on productivity. And we can then combine that with others who make a similar product. We can look at all those who make hamburgers, and that's going to determine the market supply. So when we look at the market for hamburgers, we can see that assuming costs are held constant, so ceteris paribus, ceteris paribus, if we hold costs constant, at higher prices, businesses want to sell more because they're able to make a higher profit margin. So for example, if it costs $1 to make a hamburger and McDonald's can sell it for $2, they're going to make $1 per hamburger. If we hold the cost constant, ceteris paribus, at $1, and McDonald's can now sell that burger for $5, they're going to make $4 profit. Well, which makes them happier? The higher price. And so we can see here that at higher prices, businesses are willing and able to sell more. It's a higher quantity. And so we get an upward sloping supply curve. Combine that with our downward sloping demand curve, and that's going to determine the price in the market. So if we left it up solely to the customer, hamburgers would be less than $1, right? Who wants to pay more than $1 for food? If we left it up solely to the business, to McDonald's, well, why aren't they charging hundreds of dollars for hamburgers? Because that's lots of profit, millions of dollars per hamburger. So the actual price you pay when you buy a hamburger at McDonald's or Burger King or A&W is based on supply and demand coming together. It's that point at which the amount the customer is willing to pay is equal to the amount the business is willing to sell it for. Because if the price was too high, the business would be happy because they'd be making lots of profit, but the households wouldn't want to buy it. It's too expensive. We don't want hamburgers as often. And so this surplus, where we have all these extra hamburgers nobody wants, pushes that price down. If the price was too low, then we'd all want hamburgers for every meal because it's cheaper than everything else. But businesses wouldn't be making as much profit per unit. Maybe that price is now below what it costs to make a burger, so McDonald's wouldn't want to sell it. And so what that creates is a shortage. Can't find the hamburgers we want. So how do you get the hamburgers? Well, it drives up the price until we meet that point at which the amount customers are willing to buy is equal to the price that businesses are willing to sell it for. So in micro, we look at demand for a product, supply of a product, and how that determines the price. In comparison, macroeconomics looks at the bigger picture. Okay? It's going to look at bigger topics that impact multiple markets. Now, some of the topics that impact multiple markets include things like unemployment, inflation, and interest rates. So, for example, unemployment impacts multiple markets because we have the market for labor, so demand for workers, supply of workers determines wages. It also determines the quantity of jobs, and so if we have less jobs available, that'll change the unemployment rate. It also will impact the cost of production because we have demand for a particular product like that McDonald's hamburger. And then we have the supply, how much it costs to make the McDonald's hamburger. Well, the level of unemployment impacts, as we saw, wages, and that's going to impact the cost, which will ultimately impact the price. So unemployment is a big picture idea. It's impacting multiple markets. Inflation, interest rates, same thing. We look at inflation, we're looking at the price not just of one market, we're looking at the prices of all the markets. Interest rates change based on the availability of money, so that's the financial market, as well as it's going to impact households and businesses in their purchases and expansion of businesses, so it's a bigger picture. So anything that looks at the economy as a whole, so we're looking at total production, or if we're looking at unemployment, inflation, or interest rates, because they impact so many different markets. So the key thing with macroeconomics is it's multiple markets, or we're looking at the relationship between markets. So we need a little bit of better understanding then of what we mean by markets. What markets are there? Well, here we have our households. And our households, they sell their labor to businesses, right? You get paid to work. So here we have the labor market. There are other markets for resources. So anything that's used by these companies to make their goods and services will also have a market. We'll call those factor markets. And labor is just one of those factor markets. Well, households, they sell their labor to businesses. Businesses then use that labor to make goods and services, which they sell to households in the product market. So here we have the market for goods and services. That would be the grocery store, or that would be McDonald's where you're buying your hamburger. Okay, so we have factor markets. Labor market is one of them. We have the product market where we buy and sell goods and services. We also have financial markets. Right? Households can save their money. They can borrow from banks. Businesses can borrow from banks as well. So we have that aspect as well. So in terms of households, we have you sell your labor, you buy things from the product market, you can put money in the bank. You also have money going to the government. So we have money going that way as well. We have other markets to consider, like the fact that we buy goods and services from other countries. So the rest of the world is buying and selling goods in our product markets. So we start to see this interrelationship between these different components in our economy. Macroeconomics looks at how all of these pieces are interrelated. So how one market impacts another, and how decisions by the government and banks, households, and businesses start to impact the other components. So how government decisions impact businesses and households, how government decisions might impact the financial market, and all these different pieces. So this interrelationship between the markets and the components of the economy is all part of macroeconomics. So we'll look at that in more detail in Econ 101.